Good evening, everyone, and thanks very much for coming out on a chilly evening. Tonight we have with us Leah from Beyond Blue, and she's going to give us an information session on depression and anxiety, and really just give us some facts about what it is and sort of break down the stigma on it. She's going to talk about her own experiences with mental health, and hopefully that can give us sort of a broader picture on Beyond Blue, what they do, and how we can sort of look out for each other and help those in our lives that may be experiencing depression or anxiety, or even for ourselves, what to do. Before Leah gets up here and addresses us, we're just going to open with a prayer. So I'll ask you to all rise now, and we'll just open with a prayer. Our great God and our Father above, we thank you so much for the group of people that we have around us tonight, our ecclesia that we can rely on in times of need. And Father, we praise your name, for truly we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We are created in your image, and you have given us life, and for this we are forever grateful. And we have the privilege of working with men and women together to do your will on this earth. We have a privilege and a great honour to fulfil the things which you have put in your word for us to do. But Father, life is complicated, and human nature is a hard thing. So we ask that you watch over us tonight as we take in information about our human nature, how we work, and how our nature works with us. And may it be that we can take this information into our lives, and we can apply it to our lives, and we can help those around us that need help. We can understand more our inner being. So we ask that you be with this meeting tonight, and we ask this prayer in your Son's name, our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. I'll hand over to Leah.
Hello everyone. I'd like to start by thanking you all for having me here tonight, especially on behalf of Beyond Blue, the organisation I'm affiliated with. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we meet on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And finally, I would just like to mention that this talk does contain some sensitive material regarding anxiety, depression and suicide. So if there's anyone here at any point who feels uncomfortable, please prioritise your mental health. That's what we're here for tonight. Feel free to take a step outside, catch a quick breath of air, or even stay out there if need be. I'd also like to ask everyone here tonight, with a raise of hands, who has heard of Beyond Blue before tonight? Brilliant, it's really good to hear. Now, can I get you to raise your hands again if you know what it is Beyond Blue actually does in our community? Okay, yeah, well, that's a pretty common response we get from people. So just to give you a bit of background information, Beyond Blue is an independent, non-for-profit organisation working to address issues associated with anxiety, depression and suicide prevention in Australia. Largely driven by hope and resilience, Beyond Blue aims to raise awareness with mental health, reduce the stigma that surrounds it, and encourage people to seek support early on. I'd also like to briefly take a minute to look at how prevalent anxiety and depression and suicide is in our community. So in relation to anxiety, we know that about 2 million Australians suffer from it, and depression, there are about 1 million Australians. Now, don't forget, these are just the statistics that we know of. There are plenty of people out there who don't even know what they have, or who don't want to come forward and acknowledge it because of the stigma that still surrounds it. Regarding anxiety, about 1 in 3 women will experience it in their lives, and 1 in 5 men. Now, anxiety is so much more than just feeling really stressed or really anxious because of a stressful thing in our lives. Anxiety can occur without a trigger at all, and if there is a trigger, it can actually last days before, during and after such an event. People can feel really tense, really paranoid, they hyperventilate, they have anxiety attacks, they get really sweaty palms. All of these kinds of symptoms might seem kind of usual in everyday lives, but altogether, for someone almost every single day, it's a really serious issue. In terms of depression, we know that about 1 in 6 women will suffer from it, and 1 in 8 men. And again, depression is so much more than just feeling really sad. It's having extreme fatigue, which can cause people to sleep for days at a time, Or on the other side, people might actually struggle to sleep because of this. It also causes fluctuating moods, the lack of motivation for anything you once loved, and of course the really common association with depression, lack of happiness, lack of any emotion really, which again works in contrast with someone who has fluctuating moods. Now, in terms of suicide, a very touchy subject, I do realise, we know that about 8 Australians take their lives every single day, 6 of whom are men. Of course, this is an approximate, but it's a very, very accurate approximate. Now, every single suicide, every single attempt has serious repercussions. One life affects hundreds in the broader community. Friends, family, work colleagues, people you meet at the shops and establish a friendly relationship with. A lot of people that you don't really realise will take this close to heart. Now, it's likely that all of us here will have an experience with mental health, whether it's because we personally experience it or because we know someone who does experience it. And this is because mental health doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care about your age, your ethnicity, your gender. All it cares about is seeping itself really deep into your soul and taking over your life. And that's honestly the best way that I can describe it from my own experiences. And the issue is that people will experience this, but they feel like they can't speak up and talk about it because there's such a big stigma that still surrounds it. And that's why I'm here today on behalf of Beyond Blue, to try and remove this stigma, to try and start a conversation, to try and make you feel comfortable with talking about these kinds of things that are tremendously important, not only to ourselves, but to our loved ones. And that kind of leads me to, well, why am I a speaker for Beyond Blue? I'm a speaker for 3 main reasons. The first and foremost is because I want to start a conversation and I want to raise awareness. We might not experience it right now, but at some point we will experience some kind of mental health condition directly or indirectly. My second hope is to let people realise that it's not a weakness to suffer from this kind of thing, and it's also not uncommon. And the third thing is that we are never alone. We always have someone there with us, friends, family, again, like I said before, hundreds of people in our own personal community. So I'm going to try and shed some more light on mental health by telling you about my own experiences with it. Again, it might be a little touchy for people, so don't forget if you need to, you can leave. My story starts as an 11-year-old. This is when I first started noticing signs and symptoms of anxiety. I've always been a confident person, really ambitious, incredibly competitive. I can't remember the last time that I played Monopoly because no one wants to play it with me anymore. I'm that competitive. So these kinds of traits meant that I was quite successful in my academic and my athletic life, but it also meant that I put a lot of pressure on myself. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, but I was my worst enemy. I was never good enough in my own eyes. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I succeeded, it was never good enough. And for an 11-year-old, this was quite concerning. At the time, I didn't know this was going to lead to anxiety. I just thought that it was just something I was experiencing going into my teen years, and it would be a phase, it would pass, it would be fine. Little did I know that it would turn into something so much more sinister. So my anxiety started as social anxiety. I stopped feeling comfortable around my friends. I started noticing that I was feeling things in social situations I'd never felt before. You know, like I didn't fit in, like people would talk about me behind my back. I'd always have really rapid heartbeat whenever I was in a social situation outside of school. Even at sleepovers, I would be really uncomfortable and I'd have to leave early on some nights. And I was the only one of my friends that did this, so it didn't really help with the idea that I didn't fit in. And as I got older, entered my teen years, things got a lot worse. My mood started to fluctuate greatly. I kind of lost contact with a lot of friends that I had in primary school. Now, a lot of people might think, oh, it's high school, things change, you meet new people. But I wasn't actively trying to meet new people either, which makes it a lot worse in terms of trying to maintain friendships. I also noticed that any time I was meeting a new person, not only was I actively trying not to engage in conversation with them, but I would feel like my body was closing up on itself, like I couldn't breathe, like my heart didn't have room to pound anymore. And again, I felt like I didn't fit in, like people would talk about me negatively when I wasn't around. So this kind of led to a cycle of feeling really down that I didn't have anyone to talk to, but then feeling like I couldn't talk to anyone about how I was feeling. So I was kind of stuck. And at this point in time, I noticed that I started having prolonged periods of feeling really down. Not just really sad, it's a bad day, I'll wake up tomorrow and it will be better. But I mean, as a 13-year-old, incredibly void of any emotion. And when I did feel an emotion, it was either I wasn't good enough, I'm just really sad, and also I'm really angry at myself because I wasn't strong enough to get past this phase, or what I thought was a phase. And by the time 2015 came around, when my anxious tendencies and depressive thinking kind of culminated into one big ball inside my chest, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, and I was diagnosed with anxiety. So I do know now that anxiety and what I later found out to be depression, as well as external influences, led to the onset of an eating disorder. So I lost about 15 kilos within the space of a few months. I was excessively over-exercising every single day. I'd wake up before the sun would even rise, and I'd exercise for about an hour, and then I'd go to school. I wouldn't talk to anyone. I didn't have any friends at this point in time. Come home, exercise for another hour or so, do some homework, and go to bed. And that was my life. That was literally all I had in my life. And of course, appointments, which isn't as glamorous as it seems. So I kind of used exercising and restricting what I was eating as a coping mechanism. I thought, if I can't control the way that I'm feeling, then at least I can control the way that I look and what I'm doing. And this became another really sinister cycle. I would bottle up every emotion that I was feeling, and then I would kind of almost project that onto how I was treating my body, which was very, very poorly. My heart was incredibly weak. I was very close to being hospitalized. Doctors said that I'm very lucky I didn't have a heart attack at this point in time, and I was only 15 years old. So one day, I kind of noticed that I was starting to feel more and more kind of stressed and closed off from the world, and like my heart was becoming tighter and tighter in my chest. And this was the onset of my very first anxiety attack. So again, I was only 15 years old. I'd never experienced an anxiety attack before. I knew that I had anxiety at this point as I had been diagnosed, but I still didn't know what to look out for, even though I did know one day I probably would suffer from an anxiety attack. So I was actually out for dinner with my family, and being someone who was restricting what they were eating, I felt really overwhelmed with all of the food in front of me. I couldn't eat any of it because I was literally scared to eat it, because, in my mind, the food was really bad for me. It was going to make me even worse. And since I hadn't really spoken about these thoughts and feelings, I didn't know how to cope with what was going on. So I started breathing really heavily. I remember this so clearly because it was my first anxiety attack. We were in a crowded restaurant and I had no idea how to cope with what was happening. So my heart rate started to rise really rapidly. My hands became incredibly sweaty. My mind kind of went blank, even though I was becoming really, really anxious. My mind was just blank. I didn't think of anything except for, the rising stress inside my body. And before I knew it, I burst into tears in the middle of that restaurant, in front of these plates of food. My family kind of stopped what they were doing. They just looked at me. They knew what I was experiencing, but they didn't know how to cope with it. They didn't understand it. So I got up, I ran to the bathroom, I locked myself in there for about 15 minutes, and I cried non-stop. I felt like I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move, I was paralysed sitting on top of the toilet seat. And eventually, my parents kind of coaxed me out. We went home, I went to bed, and we didn't talk about it. And this brings me to a really important thing about mental health, and that's your family. Anxiety, depression, or in my case, an eating disorder, has a serious impact on your loved ones. Despite my mum coming to all of my appointments with me, and I can't stress enough how many I went to, I was seeing at least 2 different specialists every single week. And I was having probably 1 blood test every single week. And I was being monitored for what I was eating by professionals every single week. And yet, I didn't want to talk about what was happening. So my mum couldn't cope with what was happening because despite the information she was getting from other people, I wasn't being open with her. I wasn't being honest with her. I didn't feel comfortable around my own mother. I thought she would judge me. I thought she was seeing me through the eyes of someone who saw a weak shell of a once happy little girl. And the same goes for my stepdad. He kind of didn't talk to me a lot at all throughout my experience with mental health. And that's not because he didn't care, but it's because he didn't know how to talk to me. My older sister, whose relationship I cherish more than anything else, again, didn't know how to speak to me. When she did interact with me, it was like someone who was talking to a really, really sick, elderly person who didn't have much time left and they just wanted to make the most of it. And this was a reality for me, that I didn't have a lot of time left. Because physically, I was deteriorating very rapidly. I continued to lose weight even while being monitored by professionals. Internally, the way I was thinking, from the middle of 2015 to the beginning of 2016, I contemplated taking my own life every single day. And seriously contemplating it. I even thought of ways that I would do it. I thought of when I would do it because my parents wouldn't be home. And I thought of how much better my family would be because of it. Because of this guilt, what I was putting my family through. And because I didn't have anyone to talk to, all of these feelings just got stronger and stronger and stronger. So I was never diagnosed with depression, although I was closely monitored for it because I was displaying depressive tendencies. Looking back, I can say with confidence that I did have depression. You don't have to be clinically diagnosed to know in yourself what you are or are not suffering from. So an eating disorder, anxiety, depression for a 15-year-old. Not a really good combination. Netball, I couldn't play it anymore. I was too weak to play it. Writing, something I once loved. My mind wasn't functioning properly. I couldn't think clearly. Reading, once a really, really good reader, I actually lost my ability to read properly. I could still read, but I couldn't take in what I was actually trying to read. I just felt like life was a black hole. It's almost like when you're really cold and you're running through the rain and you I wish I had a jumper, or I wish I was inside. I wish I remember what feeling warm was like, even though I kind of know what it is. That's what happiness was like for me. I remembered feeling it one time, kind of remembered what it was like, but I actually forgot how to be happy. My relationship with my family was destroyed. All of my friends who I'd known since, early days of primary school no longer spoke to me. Not because they didn't care, but because of what I now realise. They didn't know how to speak to me. They've even come up to me now and said, I knew what you were going through, and I'm so sorry that I didn't reach out to you. It's just because I don't know how to talk to people who are suffering from what you did. And I think they would have benefited from a conversation such as this because it's open. I'm trying to teach you that there's nothing to be ashamed about with mental health, and it's really, really prevalent, not only in society as a whole, but also for the youth. But as I kind of got worse and worse, I kind of realised I needed help more and more, which is a little bit of a paradox because I didn't want help, but I did want help. I couldn't get help, but help was right there. And for people who are kind of dealing with mental health, recovery is either a slow transition where you gradually get to that stage that you're willing to actually reach out and talk to someone and then you do, or it's like me and it's as quick as the flip of a switch. And again, I remember this day very clearly because it was the second anxiety attack I ever had, and it was because it was on a family holiday, a time when you're supposed to be relaxed, happy, enjoy your time with your family in a different location of the world. But I couldn't enjoy any of my time spent in Asia. I was in Cambodia at the time, and again at a restaurant, seems to be a reoccurring theme. But the same kind of things came over me. I'm not happy that I'm here. I can't eat any of this food that's in front of me. What am I doing with my life? I had another anxiety attack, the exact same experience as my first anxiety attack. I had to run to the bathroom and lock myself in there. And when I was in that bathroom, it was kind of the point that I had considered taking my own life the most. I was seriously considering doing it then and there. But it was also the point when I thought, why am I letting what's going on inside my mind control my life? Why am I not opening up to the people who love me and who I love, and instead letting what's going on inside of me destroy everything? So once we got home, I started taking my mental health more seriously. I reached out to a GP, the third GP that I'd seen in my experiences with mental health. As a side note, I'd also like to mention that I saw 4 different mental health professionals, 2 eating disorder professionals, a psychologist, and 3 nutritionists. So it was a very expensive process, and it was also one that I was so reluctant to engage in that I was kind of wasting their time and I was wasting my time. Because if I wasn't switched on properly, it was like sitting in front of a brick wall for me. So anyway, once I was back from Cambodia, I was taking my mental health more seriously. I started talking to more people about it. It was really hard at first, but the more I did it, the easier it became. So I was speaking to my GP, I was speaking to my mum. She slowly got better at having open conversations with me as well. She was basically my rock the entire time. I can't tell you the amount of times that I saw her break down in tears because she didn't know how to deal with what I was going through. She felt like it was her responsibility and she was failing as a mother. Well, in reality, she was trying her very hardest, and it was me who wouldn't let her in, who wouldn't let her help me, because I thought that it was weak if I accepted help. I thought that once I accepted it, it would be like admitting defeat. And I also thought that she wouldn't understand, so what was the point? But once I slowly started opening up to her more and more, I kind of re-established a better relationship with my mind. This was between 2016 and 2017. I was slowly gaining weight, really slowly. I had a few more anxiety attacks, but I was getting better at noticing when they were coming on, and so I could deal with them better once they had occurred. And I no longer kind of had the same depressive thoughts that once flooded my mind on a daily basis. So by the beginning of 2017, I was declared weight restored. I was also still considered to have anxiety, but I hadn't displayed any symptoms in quite a long time, so I wasn't at higher risk as what I once was. The coping mechanisms that I put in place to kind of help me get to this stage were things as simple as taking walks, listening to podcasts, actually having an honest and open conversation with my mum or my sister or my friend or my GP. Cooking, something I once loved doing, but I hated in my experience with an eating disorder because food was the enemy to me. I also kind of started getting back into exercising. I wasn't allowed to do any when I was going through anorexia, even though I obsessively exercised pretty much every single day, even Christmas Day, for at least 2 hours. So once I could slowly start implementing exercise back into my routine, I kind of noticed I was starting to feel this really warm feeling that I hadn't really felt in a while. I started easing up with the pressure that was constantly on my shoulders, and I realized that I was happy. I realized I was doing something for the enjoyment of it. The endorphins were definitely helping me, and I was feeling physically and mentally stronger. So fast forward again to 2018, I no longer experienced any depressive thoughts. I definitely still had my times with anxiety, but I'd learned how to cope with it a little bit better. I'd re-established a better relationship with my body and my mind through, like I was saying before, podcasts, going for walks, being more open and honest with people. And I realised that I'd come so far in such a short amount of time, and it made me really happy and it made me want to do more, do better. So I started reaching out to more people in my life who I suspected might have mental health conditions, talking to them, asking if they were okay. And I actually realised a lot of people who I know were experiencing depression or anxiety, not really eating disorders because that's more of a particular manifestation of mental health. But nonetheless, it felt amazing to connect with them, to have a real conversation with them, and to kind of realise that I'm not alone in experiencing this, and I'm not alone in wanting to get better from this. So I started university last year, something which honestly amazed me because I didn't think that I was going to get there. whether it was because I would fail high school on account of being almost not threatened, but told that if I don't start taking my health more seriously, I'm going to be put into a rehabilitation centre and I'm going to miss out on months of school. And that honestly would have, like I said before, probably led to me failing year 12 and having to either repeat it or potentially not even do it because I was at serious risk of taking my own life. So I'm in university, I'm still experiencing some social anxiety, but I'm learning how to cope with it better. I'm still seeing my GP nowhere near as regularly as what I once did, but once every 2 or 3 months to kind of touch base and share what I'm feeling with her and kind of reset my mind almost. On my birthday last year, for the first time in 4 years, I actually ate cake. I was no longer afraid of it, feeling guilty for eating that because I didn't have an eating disorder. I was happy and wanting to be around my friends and family who were singing happy birthday to me. And I was actually wanting to experience life. I was no longer controlled by the darkness that basically covered my mind like a blanket. And I always tell people, recovery isn't just one linear progression. You don't kind of decide you're going to get better and then get better and better and better and better, and eventually you're recovered. It's my belief that you don't ever fully recover from mental health. I definitely still have relapses every now and then, but like I said, I know how to deal with it a lot better. I can speak to people about it. I'm no longer ashamed of what I'm going through. If anything, I'm proud that I've actually taken it upon myself to want to get better and to let other people who are experienced and qualified to have a say in my happiness and to actually help me get there. So I can now plan for my future, which is amazing. I can now help other people who might be experiencing the same kind of things that I am, and it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't found the support system that I now have, or if I had reached out to Beyond Blue. They played a major part in my recovery. Their online forums were there for me 24/7 whenever I needed them. They have support lines where you can call up at any point in the day and talk to someone if you think that you may be considering taking your own life. And they have articles telling you signs and symptoms of anxiety and depression. So if you're not sure what you're experiencing, you can go there and you can kind of have a look and see if you're suffering from any of those things. And it was through Beyond Blue that I actually realised myself that I was going through anxiety and depression. And then when I was diagnosed with it, that's when I kind of realised, yes, this is something I should take seriously. So in that whole kind of crazy mess of a story, the main points that I want to stress to you is that anxiety and depression can happen to anyone at any point in their lives. If it does happen, it shouldn't be seen as a weakness. It shouldn't be seen as something that'll just get better. It's just a phase. You'll kind of switch your mind off, switch it back on, and you'll be fine, because it definitely doesn't work like that. And I also want to really stress, more than anything else, in case you didn't realise from this talk, seeking help and speaking to someone about it is the most important thing that you can do at any point. If you know someone with mental health, being that person who they can speak to is the most important thing that you can do. Letting them know that it's safe and it's okay to talk about this kind of thing could save a life. So, with all of that being said, I urge every single one of you to take your own mental health seriously. And if you have any questions about anything, feel free to ask me now or later on if you're not comfortable talking in front of the entire room. Thank you. That's it, yeah. Yes?
Thank you very much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
That's okay, thank you.
Can you tell us a bit more about the support options that are available at Beyond Blue?
Yeah, so they have their general website, and if you go to a place, it's like the community tab or forum or something along those lines. It's actually like a blog where you can post your own little paragraphs, and then the entire community who's registered with Beyond Blue can actually comment on that post. They can kind of interact with you. They definitely don't diagnose anything, but they can help talk you through things. There are also a couple of new kind of programs that have been established recently. There's one, I can't remember what it's called, but it's like a number you can call, and you talk to a qualified professional who has experience. They have certifications, and they kind of, if you think that you're at risk of taking your own life, they talk you through things. They can also talk to you if you think you are suffering from depression and kind of help you in that moment, but also suggest different resources that you can find to kind of help you what you're going through. They also have a few programs that they're starting up to help with schools. So I'm pretty sure they're going to start adding things into certain curriculums or sending people out to different schools to kind of talk to the youth about this, because it is a really serious condition. And in general, they just have a lot of information about anxiety, depression, suicide on their website. Like I was saying, signs and symptoms. They suggest coping mechanisms. They also give you a list of different healthcare professionals who you can contact to help you through things, like a GP, a psychologist. I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but that kind of thing. I'm sure there are plenty more options on the website that I'm kind of forgetting in this moment, but there's a lot there definitely to help anyone of any age. Yes?
So how important do you think it is to find the balance between keeping someone's confidence and yet telling other people if they think they need help? Like you said that you felt people were talking about you, or someone confides in you, do you keep their confidence or do you tell other people?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. So I'm not, a qualified professional, so I can't give you an exact answer, but I can tell you that if you're speaking to someone one-on-one, unless they kind of suggest that they're at risk of harming themselves or harming others, you keep it confidential. But if they kind of give you the impression that something very bad is going to happen, then you do have full right to kind of breach that confidentiality and talk to a healthcare professional. It's kind of like if you're with a psychologist, they keep everything completely confidential unless you present a risk to yourself. I know from my experience when I've spoken to people, even just being that shoulder they can almost cry on is enough for them to kind of inspire them to go find help on their own. So I know that it is a hard balance. You don't have to feel obligated reporting them unless, like I said, they're at risk of harming themselves. I hope, does that answer your question? Kind of, not really?
Sure.
Or?
So is there better ways of reporting, or what do you think is the, like, I don't know.
So if you're kind of uncertain about them, do you mean who do you go to speak to?
You're supposed to go through a process.
Okay, so there's no one correct process. I find that if it's a younger person, speaking to their parents is the most direct way, because then they can kind of have more authority to take them to a healthcare professional. You can also even go through Beyond Blue. Talk to them about, I've reached out to this person, I'm fearful that they're at risk of, a mental health condition or potentially taking their own life, and they will send you resources on who specifically you can speak to, and ways that you yourself can kind of help the process along. Any more questions? Yes, sorry?
Did you ever take to alcohol to solve your problem?
No. So I never turned to alcohol or drugs. And I also just want to clarify, I never had medication in my recovery either. I do know, however, alcohol is a really prevalent kind of coping mechanism that people use. I don't have experiences with it, so I can't say what kind of impact it does have. But I know people firsthand who have turned to alcohol, and they said that it almost acted as a suppressant. So it helped kind of numb the pain that they were experiencing in their mind. It took the edge off of things. But then once it wore off, everything was back to the way it once was, and they just had a really bad hangover. So, yeah. Yeah?
You probably mentioned this, I've probably forgotten, but what was really the turning point, you think, from where you were at the lowest of lows to actually think you were on the rise and you think you were getting mentally better?
Yeah, so I think it was, like I said, just like a weird switch in my mind. It was after my second anxiety attack, and I kind of, in that moment, realised what I was putting my family through. I didn't know what was going on, so how were they supposed to know? And it was almost it could actually be perceived as a bad thing, but I saw it from the outsider perspective, saying, this is what I'm putting my family through. This isn't right. I'm feeling guilty about that. And it was also because I realised my body was slowly deteriorating, my mind was no longer controlled by myself, and I just had enough of it. Like I said at the very beginning, I've always been really ambitious, quite confident, and it was almost sad to think I'd gotten to this place where I didn't even care if I had ambitions. I didn't care if I was seen as confident or not confident or whatever. So I think it was just a weird switch that the anxiety tack actually brought on. Yeah.
When you're talking to someone with depression and so forth, obviously saying the wrong thing can have a very detrimental effect. Is there some certain things that you need to be aware of that can have that detrimental effect if you, I suppose, you notice to say, how are you feeling, so I think that might be
Yeah.
some sort of things that you need to be aware of that could have a detrimental effect on you more?
Yeah, so again, I'm not 100% qualified to advise specifically, but I can say it's really individualistic. I find it's really best to kind of, if you know what kind of person they are outside of their depression, like if you separate them from their mental health, if they're a really ambitious person or really outgoing, really extroverted, it can be best not to kind of treat them like they've become something else entirely, like, oh, you look like you've been really down lately, you're not as outgoing, what's wrong with you? That kind of thing can have a bad impact. I find saying what's wrong with you is the worst thing you can say. Definitely try to avoid that. Whereas on the other hand, if it's someone who's really shy generally and you just think that something's not quite right, even though they're usually quite shy, it can be just as bad to say, oh, why don't you just speak up a little bit more? Why aren't you, trying to be more confident? What's wrong? Again, what's wrong with you? The best things that you can potentially say are just, are you feeling okay lately? Do you need to talk about anything? Is there anything in your life that's stressing you out at the moment? Different people have different trigger words, which is quite difficult to kind of navigate your way around. But I'd say definitely don't ask what's wrong with you. Don't say, oh, why don't you just snap out of it? Things like that are really bad. I'm sorry I can't give you a really straight answer. It's just really hard because each person is completely different. Yes?
On the websites, because I know there's Lifeline, there's Canada, and
Yes.
there's the Suicide Hotline and Beyond Blue, do they have sections on there for someone who, if you want to help someone, is there sections on there for you to go on how to approach someone? Like, is there something on there like resources for a family member if you're concerned about someone?
Yes.
Do those resources online, do they have something that you could then go on to how to approach it?
Yeah, so I'm fairly sure on the main Beyond Blue website there should be a tab or within a tab that are resources for friends and family, and they help kind of take you through different steps that you can utilise if you know someone's suffering from depression or anxiety. It might not be really explicit, direct, step-by-step processes, but they give you some general coping mechanisms and things to try and implement. Yeah.
Thanks to that. There's actually a good a good few sections on there about different types of care relationships as well.
Yes,
So,
there is.
For example, it could be if you have a child that has anxiety, or if you have a partner, or dealing with different types of complexities in relationships. So it's actually quite good on when it comes to being a supporter and carer as well.
Yeah. Yes.
If you think in your own life, I'm feeling a bit flat, it's not going away, would you say the GP is a good place to start, or you would start with something like Beyond Blue first, or is it really individualistic and then where you feel that
it's definitely up to the individual, but I personally would say definitely see a GP first. I know when I had training with Beyond Blue, they even said your GP would be your first point of action, your first call. If you don't feel confident enough to go to your GP, like you don't feel like it's bad enough or there's nothing there, Beyond Blue is a great way to kind of start and see, okay, well, these are all of the things that are associated with this mental health condition. How many am I kind of suffering from? Do I feel like this applies to me? And it could even give you confidence to then go see your GP, but definitely GP would be point of action, because actually it was last year or the year before, mental health was the most commonly reported cause for seeing your GP. So they're definitely used to it. Yep. Okay, well, thank you for your questions. If you have any more or you feel like I didn't quite cover it as well as you would have hoped, definitely check out the Beyond Blue website. There are links to all of the different services they provide. They answer a lot of the questions that you have asked tonight in more depth, and they give you a lot of good numbers to call, even email addresses if need be. So thank you again.
Well, from us, a big thank you for Leah tonight. Your presentation has been eye-opening, informative and quite helpful for us to open up about anxiety and depression and give us some tools to help us with our own mental health and those that are in our lives that may be experiencing issues with mental health. So thank you from us. A couple of things quickly, not that they are looking for it as such, but Beyond Blue do accept donations. So if it's something that you feel like you would want to give to, a cause that you would want to give to, because all the resources and the help desks and all that sort of thing, they do take money to actually run. So come up and see me after if you would like to make a donation. We will be having a light supper afterwards, as per usual. And we'll close tonight the same way we opened, just with a prayer. So I'll ask you to all rise and we'll close now. Father, we have had time tonight to consider our incredible brains and how they work. And sometimes this can be hard to comprehend. But help us to open our hearts and our minds, to reach out to those who may be struggling, or take the time to ask if someone is okay. Even if it takes time from our own lives and effort from ourselves, help us to be that person. Help us to be your Son's disciples, who are known by the fact that they love one another. Tonight has helped us to be more aware of mental health in our own lives and in the lives of others. Give us the strength to act on this, to make sure that we are looking out for not just ourselves, but all those that we come in contact with our lives. We are your family, Father, and we must look out for each other. Help us in our lives to be part of a healthy family unit. You give us many blessings, Father, and the food that we're about to have tonight is just another small example of your generosity. We thank you for all that you do for us, Father, and we ask this prayer in our brother's and future King's name, our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.